Okay, so imagine like a world where the U.S. just stayed out of World War II in Europe. No D-Day, no liberation of Paris, no American GIs fighting in
You
Europe.
go wild, right?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, how different would the world be? And that's what I find so fascinating about Germany's declaration of war on the U.S.
Oh, for sure.
Most people probably think it was just like an automatic reaction to Pearl Harbor,
Right.
but it's way more complicated than that.
Oh, absolutely. It seems straightforward at first glance, but the more you dig into it, the more you uncover all these layers, like you start to see all these strategic miscalculations
Uh-huh.
and even internal dissent, within the Nazi government.
Mm.
And then, of course, there were all these consequences that just rippled across the globe.
Yeah, yeah. So today we're going to dive deep into December 1941. We're going to unpack like all the different factors that led to this decision, and we're going to explore whether it was a blunder of epic proportions or, maybe an unavoidable step given the way the world was already headed.
Sounds good.
Cool. So first, let's set the stage. It's 1941, right?
Right.
Europe is a powder keg.
Yeah. The Nazi war machine is on the move. Britain's hanging on by a thread. And the U.S. is in this really tricky situation.
Yeah.
Or trying to, support democracy without getting directly involved.
Right, like walking a tightrope, sending weapons and supplies but not troops, the whole Lend-Lease thing.
Exactly. It was
Yeah.
it was a tense time, almost like everyone knew that something big was about to happen.
Oh, for sure. And then, boom, Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941.
A date which will live in infamy.
Okay, but here's the thing that always kind of threw me off. Germany declared war on the U.S. after Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
Like, it wasn't an immediate response, it was a few days later.
Mm.
So why? Like, why declare war on a country half a world away when you're already fighting this massive war in Europe? It doesn't really make sense on the surface,
Well, to really understand that, we need to look at the Tripartite Pact,
Okay.
the alliance between Germany, Japan, and Italy. Hitler felt obligated to support Japan, honor the alliance,
Uh-huh.
but he also saw it as an opportunity.
Okay, now that's where it gets really interesting. An opportunity for what? Like, what did he think he could gain by declaring war on the U.S.?
So believe it or not, Hitler actually thought that declaring war on the U.S. would help Germany.
Like, what? How could that possibly help?
He thought that by drawing the U.S. into a war in the Pacific, it would divert American resources away from Europe.
Hmm.
Ease the pressure on his forces.
I see. So it was like a strategic gamble.
Yeah, a gamble, a miscalculation of epic proportions.
Okay, so he totally underestimated America, right?
Oh, yeah, big time. He fundamentally misunderstood the nature of American power.
Like, what do you mean by that?
Well, he looked at the U.S. and he saw a nation that was divided
Divided out.
by racial diversity
Hmm.
and obsessed with capitalism.
Okay.
He believed it was inherently weak, lacking the will to fight a long war.
So it was like not just racism, it was also like a strategic blind spot.
Exactly. He saw America's diversity as a weakness, but it was actually a huge source of strength.
Yeah, yeah. Like, think about the vast pool of talent, all the different perspectives.
Right.
The sheer determination that a diverse nation can bring to a fight.
Absolutely. And then beyond the social factors, Hitler completely failed to grasp the sheer scale of American industrial capacity.
Right.
He did not anticipate how quickly the U.S. could shift from producing cars and consumer goods to churning out tanks and planes and ships
Wow.
on a scale that would just dwarf anything the Axis powers could manage.
Yeah, yeah. And he also seems to have completely missed the unifying effect that, like, a direct attack would have on the American people.
Oh, for sure.
Whatever isolationist sentiments existed before Pearl Harbor,
Mhm.
they pretty much vanished overnight.
Yeah.
Total sleeping giant moment.
Absolutely. But here's where things get even more interesting. Not everyone in the Nazi leadership agreed with Hitler's decision to declare war on the U.S.
Wait, hold up. Dissent in the Nazi regime.
Yeah.
That's not something you hear about every day.
I know, right? It kind of shatters that image of a perfectly obedient goose-stepping machine.
Yeah.
Some high-ranking officials, even military commanders, they saw the U.S. as a potential threat they should avoid provoking.
Mm.
They argued that a war on two fronts would stretch Germany's resources way too thin,
Right.
risking disaster.
Yeah. So why? Why did Hitler ignore these warnings?
Well, at that point in the war, you got to remember, Hitler was drunk on victory.
Okay.
He'd conquered France. He'd driven deep into the Soviet Union.
Right.
He probably thought he was invincible.
Yeah, and surrounded by yes men.
Exactly. No one to challenge his flawed assumptions.
So this was like a classic case of hubris, right?
Yeah, I think so. He was convinced of his own genius, and that conviction, coupled with a profound misunderstanding of America, led him to make what many historians consider one of the biggest blunders of the entire war. A blunder that would have immediate and far-reaching consequences, not just for Germany, but for the entire world.
So let's talk about those consequences.
Yeah.
Because, once that sleeping giant was awakened, things were never going to be the same.
Yeah.
So we were talking about the consequences of Germany's declaration of war on the U.S.
Right.
And it's almost like flipping a switch.
Yeah.
You've got, like, Roosevelt giving his Day of Infamy speech.
Right.
And you've got enlistment lines stretching around the block.
Absolutely.
Factories retooling to build tanks instead of cars.
Yeah.
It's like American society just completely transforms.
It really was a remarkable transformation, and it reveals something really crucial about America's ability to adapt and to mobilize its industrial might in a crisis.
Yeah.
Like, imagine Detroit, the heart of American car manufacturing, transformed practically overnight into a war machine.
Yeah, it's crazy.
So what stands out to you about this rapid response?
I think just the sheer speed and scale of it all is just mind-blowing. Like, I remember reading that by the end of the war, the U.S. was producing ships at just an unbelievable rate.
It's true.
Something like a new Liberty ship every single day.
Yeah, those Liberty ships were absolutely essential for transporting troops and supplies across the Atlantic.
Right.
And this logistical feat completely overwhelmed Germany's U-boat campaign, which they had been relying on to cripple Allied shipping.
Yeah.
It was a total game changer.
So Hitler's plan to, distract the U.S. in the Pacific
Right.
and relieve pressure on his forces in Europe.
Yeah, that backfired.
Yeah, big time.
Spectacular. I mean, instead of weakening the Allied war effort,
Right.
Hitler had inadvertently unleashed a sleeping giant.
He really did.
The U.S. didn't just ramp up its support for the war in Europe.
Right.
Its industrial might, coupled with its growing military force, proved decisive in turning the tide against Germany.
Yeah, and let's not forget the impact of American troops on the battlefield.
Right.
Like D-Day, the liberation of France, the push into Germany itself, those were all made possible in large part because of the resources and the manpower that the U.S. brought to the fight.
For sure.
And that brings us to another crucial point.
Okay.
Allied unity.
Right.
Germany's declaration of war solidified the alliance between the U.S. and Britain, creating this united front that was far more formidable than the sum of its parts.
You're absolutely right. Hitler, through his own actions, inadvertently forged a bond between nations that would have profound implications for the post-war world.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy when you think about it.
It is.
It's almost like Hitler inadvertently created the very superpower that would eventually help defeat him.
That's one of history's great ironies, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is.
By attacking America, Hitler unintentionally ignited the very forces that would lead to his downfall.
It's wild.
So how does this change your understanding of the war's outcome? Was the U.S. entry a decisive factor, or was Germany already on a path to defeat?
It's a tough question.
It is.
It's hard to imagine the Allies achieving victory without the U.S., especially when you consider the scale of the fighting on the Eastern Front against the Soviets.
Yeah.
But I guess that's the question at the heart of this whole discussion, isn't it?
It is.
Was Germany's declaration of war a colossal blunder?
Right.
Or was it, like we said earlier, just the inevitable outcome of the global forces that were already at play?
Yeah, and it's a debate that historians still grapple with.
Yeah.
Some argue that even without direct U.S. involvement, Germany was ultimately doomed, overstretched and facing growing Soviet resistance.
Right. But others believe that the U.S. entry was the decisive factor, right? The sheer scale of American contributions, the industrial output, the manpower,
right,
the technological advancements like radar.
For sure.
And eventually, of course, the atomic bomb.
Yeah, and beyond the material contributions, you also have to consider the psychological impact. The entry of the U.S. into the war signaled a shift in momentum, a growing sense that the tide was turning against the Axis powers.
So blunder or inevitability?
Hmm.
Seems like there's no easy answer.
It's a complex issue.
But one thing's for sure.
What's that?
Germany's decision to declare war on the U.S. had seismic consequences,
Oh, yeah.
both for the immediate conflict and for the global order that emerged afterward.
Absolutely. The ripple effects are still felt today.
Hmm.
The U.S. emerged from the war as a global superpower, shaping the political, economic, and cultural landscape of the world for decades to come.
And it all started with a declaration of war that in hindsight seems almost unfathomable.
I know, right? It's hard to believe it actually happened.
It really is.
And what's fascinating to me is the sheer hubris of it all.
Yeah.
Hitler believed he could control events,
Yeah.
that he could manipulate nations like pieces on a chessboard.
Right.
He underestimated his enemies,
He really did.
overestimated his own strength, and ultimately paid the price.
It's a stark reminder that even the most powerful leaders can be blind to the forces they unleash,
Absolute.
and that actions have consequences, often unintended and far-reaching.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So, knowing what we know now,
Yeah.
was Germany's declaration of war a blunder? Or was it, as we said earlier, inevitable?
So let's unpack those two possibilities a bit further.
Okay.
Explore the arguments on each side and see if we can draw any conclusions.
Sounds good.
What are your initial thoughts on the blunder versus inevitability question?
You know, it's funny. I keep thinking about unintended consequences.
Yeah.
It's like a domino effect.
Right.
One decision, sets off this chain reaction, and then boom,
Exactly.
the outcomes no one could have predicted.
Yeah. And in this case, it's almost as if Hitler, through his arrogance and miscalculations,
Yeah.
inadvertently sowed the seeds of his own destruction.
So was Germany's declaration of war a blunder, like a colossal misjudgment that sealed their fate?
Yeah.
Or was it, in the grand scheme of things, kind of inevitable?
Right.
Just a matter of time before the U.S. and Germany clashed.
Well, let's consider the blunder argument first.
Okay.
Proponents of this view often point to the immediate consequences of Hitler's decision.
Right.
The declaration really galvanized American public opinion,
Uh-huh.
turning a reluctant participant into a determined adversary.
Yeah, for sure.
And then, of course,
Yeah.
it unleashed the full force of American industrial and military might, tipping the scales decisively in favor of the Allies.
Right. I mean, without the U.S. entry,
Yeah,
the war might have dragged on for years
absolutely.
with a far higher cost in lives and resources.
It's a chilling thought.
It really is.
So from this perspective, Hitler's decision was a catastrophic miscalculation.
Okay, but what about the inevitability argument? What leads some historians to believe that this clash between the U.S. and Germany was, destined to happen?
Well, here the focus kind of shifts to the broader context. You have this fundamental ideological clash between Nazism and democracy.
Uh-huh.
You have the economic competition between these rising powers.
Right.
And then you have the growing U.S. involvement in the European conflict through Lend-Lease.
Yeah.
All of these factors kind of suggest a collision course.
Yeah, so even without Pearl Harbor,
Right.
tensions were escalating.
They were.
And war might have been unavoidable.
Exactly. Some argue that the declaration itself was just a matter of timing, that sooner or later those underlying tensions would have erupted into open conflict.
It's a lot to think about.
It really is.
To consider how a single decision
Right.
made in this moment of hubris and miscalculation
Yeah.
could have such profound and lasting consequences,
I know.
shaping the course of history.
Absolutely. It really underscores the complexity of history,
Yeah.
the interplay of individual choices and these larger forces and the constant potential for unintended consequences.
So where does this leave us?
Yeah.
What can we, the listeners, take away from this deep dive into Germany's declaration of war on the U.S.?
Well, I think the key takeaway is this idea of the
Okay.
interconnectedness of global events.
Uh-huh.
What might seem like an isolated incident can have ripple effects that extend far beyond the immediate participants.
Right.
And we also see the dangers of arrogance and underestimation.
Yeah.
Hitler's belief in his own invincibility and his contempt for his enemies really blinded him to the potential consequences of his actions.
And And maybe most importantly,
Yeah.
this episode reminds us that history is not just
Yeah.
like a collection of dates and battles.
It's a story.
Yeah.
It's a tapestry woven from human choices.
Yeah.
Each thread representing a decision that can shape the destiny of nations and the lives of millions.
It's kind of a sobering thought,
It is.
but also kind of empowering in a way,
How so?
because it means that that we, through our actions and choices, have the power to influence the course of history,
Yeah,
even if we may not fully grasp the extent of that influence.
precisely. As we've seen today, seemingly isolated events can have these far-reaching implications,
Yeah.
shaping the world we live in today and the world our children will inherit tomorrow.
So the next time you encounter a conflict,
Right.
whether it's on the global stage or even in your own personal life,
Yeah,
take a moment to consider the bigger picture.
absolutely.
Think about the potential consequences, both intended and unintended.
Couldn't agree more.
Remember Germany's declaration of war on the U.S.
Right.
Remember the complexities, the motivations,
Yeah.
the miscalculations, and the enduring impact of that fateful decision.
It's a powerful lesson from history.
And with that, we come to the end of our deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it enlightening,
Mhm.
thought-provoking, and maybe even a little bit unsettling.
Food for thought.
For sure.
If this episode sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to continue exploring this topic.
Yeah?
You know, there's a wealth of information out there, from books and articles to documentaries and other podcasts.
Think about the conflicts unfolding in the world today.
Hmm.
Are there any parallels to this situation?
Right.
What lessons can we learn from Germany's fateful decision in 1941?
These are important questions to ponder.
They really are.
As always, we'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah.
Feel free to share your insights on our website or social media channels.
Yeah, your perspectives really enrich the conversation and help us all gain a deeper understanding of these complex issues.
We appreciate your engagement.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the past.
It's been a great discussion.
Until next time, keep diving deep, keep questioning.
And keep learning.
Because the more we understand history,
Yeah.
the better equipped we are to navigate the present and shape the future.
Well said.